What is going on, y'all? KMBest here. I just climbed up to the top 15 with Konshu in my deck, but that is not an endorsement of getting Konshu just this second. Let's take a look at all of the decks you can play Konshu in right now and see what the future might hold for everyone's favorite bony white god. Konshu is a 6/5 with a unique piece of text. When discarded, it returns in its next phase. No other card has phases quite like Konshu. Its on reveal ability summons a card that has been discarded, sets its power to 5, and then puts it in a different lane. Konshu has two phases. The first one puts him to 6/8 and allows the card that he resummons to also go to 8 power. The second one puts him at 6/12 and allows the card that he resummons to go to 12 power. You go up in phases by discarding Konshu. So he starts at 6/5, he gets discarded once, he goes to 6/8, he gets discarded twice, he goes to 6/12. Notably, at 6/12, if you discard him again, he's just gone. That text that protects him from being discarded and climbs up phases is no longer there. That is worth pointing out. It shouldn't be a practical problem, but it is one that matters. There are also a couple of weird interactions that are worth talking about. Khonshu's second and third phases are created cards. They're not affected by Victoria Hand because they weren't created in the hand, I guess. Maybe they were created in the discard pile. I don't really know. But they are affected by Quinjet and they can be pulled by Isan. More on that later. Overall, what Khonshu is asking you to do is discard him a couple times and discard something else as well. He's going to make that something else a reasonable body on his own if he's been discarded even once. 6/8 plus 6/8, I mean, that's 16 power from a 6-drop. It's nothing to scoff at, especially because it's across multiple lanes, so you can effectively control where it goes by filling up a different lane or by filling up the lane with Khonshu. Many people had the idea to try Khonshu in Danish Hela. Now, for those who are unaware, I just did a video on this archetype, and adding Khonshu to it, I think is actually mostly making it worse. I know there was a lot of hype around this shell, but I strongly suspect that long-term, Khonshu is going to find his way to different shells and not be a supplemental Hela card. In part, that's because of what you lose by putting this stuff in there. It's not all that great to Hela back an Iron Man. You're losing out on Legion, which is actually a pretty good card at baseline for an attempt at a high roll, and you're losing out at Ghost Rider, who is honestly also very solid, especially as a blink target in exchange for another 6, and that 6 is not all that amazing. So you're a heavier deck in terms of 6s, which makes your Hela a little less reliable because she's only ever bringing back one of those. You are now no longer as balanced in terms of the ways in which you can revive, and ultimately this deck is also falling victim to a massive amount of day one syndrome, which is Khonshu very specifically goes in decks that don't really have interactive tools. A lot of people have taken to playing decks that just simply go over the top of any conceivable Khonshu deck, which makes playing Khonshu on day one a pretty awkward proposition. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that that's not influencing in some way as my opinion of this card. I know what it looks like when a really busted card comes out and people can't find answers immediately. The fact that they are able to find answers immediately, especially to stuff like this, is really notable. At the time of recording, this list had about a 45% win rate in top 10% infinite over about 200 games. By the time you watch this video, it will probably be a much larger sample size and probably about the same win rate. This is not a deck I expect to keep seeing. I expect this to be a pure day one wonder. It will not be a compelling reason for you to buy Konshu, but it is an interesting thought experiment. When I started my stream, we started looking at this kind of deck for Khonshu. And for what it's worth, I do think he's a meaningful upgrade to Apocalypse Discard when you're drawing your nuttiest nut draws. And the reason I say that is because Apocalypse Discard typically has a relative lack of things to do after a turn 5 MODOK if you already have a Dracula on the board. Sometimes you're doing like mix-ups with that Dracula to dodge Red Guardian, so you're playing the Apocalypse out, but it actually is very nice to play like a 6/18 or 6/16 or a 6/24 in the worlds where you are actually just like, MODOK into Khonshu, bring back a swarm that has 8 power. I'm also getting the Dracula Apocalypse. It's just like a really good thing to do, a genuinely powerful partner for this deck. What you ultimately run into, I think, is that there's a reason that Apocalypse Discard has not been a major part of the metagame. I felt fairly disappointed in this list, and this list was actually what 100% red-pilled me on there is not a great Khonshu deck, like capital K, capital D right now. There's stuff that we can try to do, but the metagame is genuinely quite powerful, and it's hard for even a deck that has this kind of power output to actually keep up. Yes, you can really nut off with this deck. There are some extremely powerful things that this deck can do. And one thing I will say for Khonshu that is a big plus is that it lets you get into locations that you otherwise would not be able to get into. Adding that utility to a lot of different discard decks is genuinely very solid. It's also something you can take advantage of. In worlds where you are triggering the fast forward animation off of your MODOK, your opponent might not even know that you have Khonshu. And that ultimately is where I found my greatest success. The 70% win rate referenced in the title is going to be with this next deck. And then you're all going to throw tomatoes at me because I know you know what's coming. Yeah, so I put Khonshu in a deck that was already good. Now stop me if you've heard this before. I actually felt like this was really kind of legit. It wasn't always something that mattered, but it gave you a reasonable thing, another card that returns to your hand, another card that is easy to discard. I replaced Meek with it because Meek is generally the lowest impact guy, and Khonshu actually did win me some games by just oh, I'm turn 5 MODOKing, turn 6 Khonshuing, oh, I'm Khonshuing to get a unit onto a Sanctum Sanctorum. He was not an all-star here. I want to be super duper clear that I felt like he was actually doing something useful in this list, but he was far from irreplaceable, and this is far from a list that needs him in order to actually do those things. Now, you don't have a million targets for him. Typically, the thing you're bringing back is either a swarm or a one of these shards that Dakin creates, but I did legitimately win games playing an 8-power Khonshu, bringing back something that was 8 and just going from there. He was really genuinely quite solid in the context of closed off locations like Kiln and Sanctum Sanctorum. That was surprising to me that he was as good as he was in that context, because I guess I just never thought about the ways in which we could get screwed by those locations, but discard is actually pretty vulnerable to that kind of stuff. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that Khonshu is for sure the 12th card that goes in this deck, or that you should buy him if you want to play optimized discard, but I got to tell you, I didn't think there'd be a chance of that. I thought that there was no way he would make sense in this deck. That just is preposterous, right? How could he possibly make sense in a deck as intricate and weird as this? And the answer is he's kind of just big. In those games where you're just not super popping off with some combo, you can just play a MODOK and then play a 6/16, and it's just oh yeah, that's pretty good. Discard has always had the ability to be a soft mid-range deck where yeah, there's these games where it combos off, but the rest of the time you're just playing your Morbius is a 2/8 and your Dakin is a 3/8, and in those games you're just pretty happy to do this. It's a very weird thing because I really didn't expect this to make any sense. And it's entirely possible that it doesn't make any sense. And I just chucked a good card or a bad card in a good deck, and I was wow, I'm so surprised this is working. But I will say this. I had more success with this deck, this card right now than I have like basically all season with Khonshu in it. Now, some of that is because a lot of other people are playing weird Khonshu stuff, and it's just probably a better deck than a lot of the stuff I'm playing against. Maybe it's just that. But I will say, if you asked me before I started playing this deck if I thought there was a single chance he would actually bring anything to the deck, if I thought I was doing anything other than jamming a bad card in a good deck and being like, haha, look what I've done, haha, YouTube clickbait, I would have said no. But after playing it, I kind of think there might be something here. Now that we're done being boring, let's talk about cool stuff you can do with Khonshu. And I think that this is going to be more about showing what his interactions are and the things he can do that are unique to him and the power that he can bring. This is a Husky Puppy's Cook, and the specific thing that he's really aiming at here is a bit of a hidden interaction on Khonshu, which is that the cards that are the second and third phases of Khonshu are actually created cards. That is weird, that is fascinating, that is odd. I don't really know why that is. Interestingly, they're not created in hand, so Victoria hand won't affect them. But as created cards, that means that if you discard Khonshu once, you can pull it with Isan. One of the major issues that Isan has is that you get it out early, it's very strong, but it's only ever pulling stuff that wins its own lane, and then you need to win another lane. Because Khonshu is able to win other lanes while being pulled by Isan, that is sort of the crux of what this deck is driving at. It's saying, I'm going to be an Isan deck that actually does some reasonable stuff. Now, like most Husky decks, I think I would analogize this one pretty closely to Danish Hela. This is a deck that is looking to be surprising with its points. It just wants to do something weird. It's also a deck that plays a little more mid-rangey than it looks. It looks like you're doing some super mid-rangey, janky garbage. You don't have to do any you don't really have to do this like over-the-top stuff. You are still an Iron Patriot Sam Wilson deck, and you just play like Iron Patriot Sam Wilson, Luna Snow Big Guy, Isan, stuff. The baseline of this deck is actually kind of decent in such a way that you are able to do more stuff than you probably think. The fundamental interaction being driven at here is the Isan created card Konshu because it solves the problem of Isan only really winning its own lane. Is this the best way to do that? I'm not entirely sure. The fact that we are sacrificing a spot in the deck for Yellow Jacket in order to make sure that we're actually targeting the right stuff is always an awkward position to be in, I'm sure. Yellow Jacket also has the additional utility. You're gonna laugh, but it does matter. If you have priority and they try to Shang-Chi your Isan, you can make your Isan 9 power. I can't believe I just said that sentence. This deck is probably the biggest casualty of what I like to refer to as week 1 syndrome, where a card is just released into a metagame that is impossibly hostile to it. But this is a really week 1 syndrome type thing, where it's like almost like when Annihilus came out and all the Annihilus decks that actually invested and like looked like what the future Annihilus decks would look like were just getting blown out by like small package Annihilus decks that didn't lose to opposing Annihiluses as hard because it was like 40% of what you played. This deck, I don't know if it's exactly going to look like this. I don't know if you're going to play Iron Man. I don't know if you're going to play First Ghost Rider. The reason there's so much uncertainty here is because of everything we just talked about. Your opponents are also playing Konshu, which means they're also playing things that they want to discard, which means that trying to discard your opponent's stuff right now is kind of just a fool's errand. Like, you're just helping them a lot of the time. I had someone play a Moon Knight against me, and it was just like, thanks for the boost on my Konshu. He wasn't going to get there anyway. Like, it is unpleasant. Try to do something like this in a world where everyone else is doing something like the decks we just talked about. There's upside here. There really is. It's just that right now, when you run into anyone else playing Fenris Wolf, if you're a First Ghost Rider deck, you are screwed. And if you run into anyone else who's like playing like their own discards, it's like, thanks for the Silver Samurai. It was really helpful. And they get to actually play interaction. And that's the other thing that this deck is missing. We don't get to play interaction in this deck. And I think that in a world where this deck actually does start to make sense, maybe it's like a Darkhawk deck or just something that is actually making some disruption happen, because it's really hard to justify this deck existing right now in the form that it does. Maybe we can lean further into like the 3s and 5s odd cost archetype. Maybe there's something in the more traditional Goon Knight shells. The point is, this right now is a fool's errand, but I wouldn't be surprised if something that looks a little bit like this was actually a good shell for Khonshu once everyone stopped trying to do this. Last up, we have a list that is purely for the sickos. Yes, this is a list dedicated to and inspired by, presumably, one Jimmy Dickens. Every Helicarrier list I see on Untapped, I just assume is Jimmy. I just assume that's a Jimmy thing. This is another one that I have assumed is a Jimmy thing. I'm not going to sit here and tell you this is good. This is probably like a 48% win rate deck that you can have a ton of fun with. What this deck tries to do is just play with ranges. The main thing that you're looking for is surprise. You can win a lot of cubes by being surprising and being just close enough in terms of points. Your opponent's not having a good read on what your final turn output is one of the most important things for the element of surprise, and frankly, they're never going to have a good read on what your final turn output is with this. There's also one interesting note, again, Konshu, the created cards, Quinjet will work on them. That is not nothing. So you can do things like bring back a 12 power Helicarrier a lot of the time if you get enough discards going. Now, this is a fully random deck. You are fully randomizing, but what you're basically trying to do is say, I am going to build my own Loki. And the way you do that is with Helicarrier, Quinjet, and Corvus Glaive. Energy advantage, weird stuff. Call it build your own Arishem, call it build your own Loki, call it whatever you want. The point is, what we're trying to do is just create fundamental advantages and then ride our discounts to victory. So, should you buy Khonshu? My instinct right now is that unfortunately the answer to this question is that at best you should be waiting just a little bit. There is an OTA coming out very soon that should be out tomorrow at the time you watch this video, and that is going to meaningfully change the metagame, I assume. The fact that Khonshu might go in actual discard is the one thing that should be on your mind right now. I strongly suspect that if he does end up adding some legit value to that bullseye discard list, just as like a 6/8 that brings back another 6/8 and solves some of your location issues some of the time, like it's just a sort of reinforcement of the mid-rangey part of that deck. I can see this card being worth purchasing if that ends up being true. I'm not sure it's worth being true. As far as I know, I'm like the only person playing that version of the deck. Obviously, that'll change going into the future, and we'll be able to get like a reasonable understanding of that once we have a good sample size, comparing Khonshu with the other cards that go in that last slot in the deck. I'm certainly interested to see it, because he did feel better than Meek to me. And I like that I no longer have to worry about like ordering to discard my Meek to Colleen Wing. Like that felt like all upside, frankly. And he's solving the same problems Meek does with none of the prep that you need to put into Meek, but also he is a 6-drop. So like, yeah, he better be better. You know what I mean? That is, I think, the thing that is the strongest, like, blinking light in this card's favor. I also think that it's entirely possible. We all know there's, like, some pretty powerful cards that go in a bunch of mid-range piles that are on the potential chopping block for nerfs, like Sam Wilson, things of that nature. In a world where that stuff sees meaningful, like, pain, we might be in a discard metagame, and if he ends up being important in there, there is a real chance that he's going to be worth getting. This is a long way of saying, don't get him until the OTA. Please, 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 please wait until the OTA drops. And then also probably wait like 3 more days. I know there's going to be like 50 people in the comments who are like, haha, KMBest, I watched this video and I bought Khonshu. And please don't do that. Like I'm begging you to please not do that. Like I hands on my heart, I am begging you with tears in my eyes. Please wait. Just just be smart with your tokens and your caches. Just a little bit, okay? All right, y'all. Thank you so much for checking in on this video. I really appreciate it. As always, please remember to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this breakdown of Khonshu and of his decks. I, of course, have been KMBest. You, as always, have been phenomenal, and I will see you in the next one.